presentation. Our first presentation this morning is on the knowledge-aware maturity model. And I guess it's only fitting that the most mature member of our staff, Mr. Greg Burek, will be delivering that presentation. Greg is not only our most senior member, but, yeah, he's hobbling along over here. He's also one of the most affable, mild-mannered, loving guys that you're ever going to meet. We have a lot of fun around the office. He's got a couple grandkids, Jack and Keegan, that he loves to take to Tigers baseball games. Little known fact that Greg actually used to be Mr. Moffa's boss back at Ford, back in the day when these ideas around knowledge were being developed. So he's a very important part of our organization, having developed a lot of the foundation behind what we're going to be talking about. Lately, Greg has been spending a ton of time working in the shipbuilding industry and helping them come on board. You're going to be able to hear from the NSRP right before lunch. And without that, any further ado, please help me in welcoming Mr. Greg Burek. Do you want the lavalier? Are you going to wander around? Do you want the lavalier? Yeah.
How does that sound? Good. Well, thanks, Jeff, for that very kind introduction. Although I'm not sure I like to think of myself as being that mature. But coincidentally, as Jeff mentioned, I like to talk about maturity, and specifically the knowledge-aware maturity model. Where's the controls for this? Perfect. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the concept of maturity models, but just in case, it's basically an instrument that's used by organizations to monitor their progress in terms of achieving optimization, institutionalization of particular processes or discipline. So the knowledge-aware model, as you can see right here, you're not going to be able to see too much. It's kind of an eye chart. But basically, it's a model that we've developed that allows us to kind of monitor the progress that an organization might have with regards to establishing processes, disciplines that take them from a situation where they're an ad hoc set of processes for managing certain things to defining processes, to identifying and capturing metrics that then they can use to optimize their processes overall. So the model itself consists of three major parts. The first is, along the left-hand side, we have 4 organizational elements that each of them typically capture a set of processes or disciplines in a particular area that help drive a company from an ad hoc situation to a situation where they can actually achieve total optimization. So we have across the left-hand side, we have the scope of enterprise engagement, which is kind of an effort to identify the organizational elements that might be in place for the maturity. The next one is retained knowledge allocation, and ultimately we have the bottom one, which is the organizational demand and health that measures the maturity of the organization in terms of having the right processes and people in place. So let's talk about each one individually. So the scope of the enterprise engagement, it addresses basically the scope of knowledge aware across the enterprise and ultimately the extended enterprise. So we're looking at identifying the communities. Are they local or are they actually enterprise-wide? When we look at the retained knowledge, we're looking at, is the organization actually capturing the knowledge in a way that is consistent that it's structured, or is it more ad hoc? When we go down to the knowledge allocation, this is where we talk about, is the organization committed to actually focusing on allocating the knowledge, or are we really just looking at documenting the knowledge and having people search for it? When we look at the organizational demand in health, we're addressing the level of institutionalization for the everyday workflow. And we're looking here for bottom-up demand as well as overall leadership from the organization to drive knowledge aware. Across the top, we have the 5 different levels of maturity: lagging, local tactical, replication and expanding, strategic, and extended strategic. So at the lower level, level 1 or level 0 is lagging. At this point in time, there's really no active participation in terms of knowledge management or a generalized model that's used across the organization. It's random. Any collection of knowledge is pretty much happens by happenstance. It's local, and it might be, it's really dependent on individuals rather than a system. The next one for local and tactical, limited recognition. This is where people are starting to recognize the need to have some type of approach to managing knowledge and reusing that knowledge. So we might have it where it's going across a few parts of the organization, but still it's very limited, but people are starting to recognize the value. You go to the next one, which is the repeatable across the organizations and discipline. So now we're at the point where people are actually starting to share information and knowledge from one part to another, and we're getting to a point where it's more repeatable. Level 3, strategic, is where we've actually achieved institutionalization of knowledge aware. So it's now become a part of the organization, and it's now how business is done. It's how the work gets done. It's not considered an independent process. It's stitched right into how we do our work. Extended strategic, what that talks to is actually the fact that now we've gone beyond the borders of the standard organization, and we're capturing the supply base, and we're sharing our information and our assessments with them as well. The other element is the index of passive knowledge, moving up to active knowledge. There's 2 elements to this. This is the actual active delivery and the active structuring. And the active delivery, obviously, is we're not relying on a library. We're relying on a system that we actually assess and deliver the knowledge. The structure talks to the fact that when we put this knowledge together, we're putting it in a way that makes it intrinsically active. It's not something that somebody has to read and understand how it goes together. They understand inherently how it gets applied to their process. So as I mentioned earlier, this is kind of an eye chart, and it's tough to read, so let me go through each one individually. So first, the scope of enterprise engagement. At the lower end, there's really no formal communities. We use the concept of communities of practice as a way to gauge progress in an organization along this particular organization element. We use the term community of practice, but really it's any type of recognition that you need a group of individuals or experts that are working together to manage some element of the knowledge. So again, at the lower end, it's lagging. There's really no communities of practice. As you move to the right, you start to get to the point where you have a single community of practice that's very local. Next, you get to the point where you start seeing them populate in different areas of the company, and they're starting to connect with each other. Ultimately, when you get to the strategic aspect of it, it now becomes organic. It starts to grow automatically. People are sharing information, and they're starting to recognize the value of pushing and pulling knowledge from one community of practice to the other, because ultimately, what somebody's doing in one area of the company needs to be considered and captured for another part of the process in the organization. Again, ultimately, we get to the point where we might be sharing and leasing knowledge to our supply base and collecting information and results back from them in terms of how they've applied it and what the results were. Next, with regards to the retained knowledge, starting from the left-hand side, there's, again, this is where companies typically at level 0, when you have documents, you're not really putting together the thought in terms of how the knowledge has to be applied. The focus is more on knowledge management. Let's collect the knowledge, let's put it together, document it, and people will use it as they need it. But there's really no thought about delivering. Actually, the delivery of the knowledge is more of an afterthought than anything else. At the local and tactical level, people start to recognize that there's some value in terms of taking that knowledge and migrating it into active packets or a template that provides a consistency and precision, so as it's applied, people really know how to use it and apply it, and it allows people to also capture more information back because there's a consistency there. But again, this is being applied at a very local level. The next one is, we say, replicating and expanding. At this point in time, the users are actually starting to feed the information into the K-Packs. So as the processes are running, we're building new K-Packs, new active pieces of knowledge that are going to be applied, as opposed to the level 1, where we've pretty much just focused on taking existing knowledge and putting into knowledge packets. Level 3 is strategic. This is at the point where the communities of practice are, again, they're connected, and we look at these knowledge of packets as a single source of knowledge. It's a gold standard that's applied. So you have one version that's being used in all your processes across the organization, and again, you get the feedback to continue to strengthen those. Finally, at the strategic and the extended strategic, these knowledge packets start to get exchanged with the supply base, and their experiences and assessments are then brought back to help improve our retained knowledge. At the next level, the knowledge allocation, again, at the local level, it's limited, or there's really no allocation. We're still just kind of thinking in terms of people, as people, if you build it, people will use it. It's documented. There's no real thought in terms of delivering it into the processes. At the local and tactical level, we start to organize and put these assessments together, and the knowledge packets are now being used and delivered more into the process. At level 2, the assessments, they become more integrated, so it's now becoming a key workflow element. It's part of all the workflows within the organization, and we're now using measurables to bring back and improve not only the knowledge allocation, but also the retained knowledge. Strategically, we get to the point where assessments are now really embedded into the overall workflow of the company. So anything we're doing, we have an assessment, it's being driven by these assessments, and we're able to capture the knowledge and measure the vitality of the knowledge packets so that we continue to have continuous improvement. At the extended strategic level, we've optimized it for our reactions or our interactions with the supply base, and this allows our experts, both internal and external to the company, to focus more on innovation rather than replication or repeating processes. Finally, the organizational demand and health. This talks to basically to the core of how is the organization dealing with this. So we have, at the lower level, since really there's no activity or movement with the knowledge aware, you really don't have any commitment to it either at the leadership arena or at the local arena. Stepping up to the local and tactical, you start to get more interest, but the the approach and the progress is really dependent upon a particular advocate or a leader in a local area, somebody that sees the value in knowledge aware, and they take the initiative to start testing it, experimenting with it. And there's really no broad understanding of it yet, so the concept of a bottom-up demand is just starting to percolate. At the replicating and expanding area, people are starting to see the value of knowledge aware in other organizations or other parts of the organization. So as a result, there's a ground-up demand, a bottom-up demand that's starting to overtake the need for leadership. Leadership is always valuable, but you get to the point where as Jeff likes to say, the virtuous cycle takes over, and it just starts to roll and build. You get that flywheel moving, and it starts to build momentum. Finally, at the strategic level, the engine's running. It's part of the way we're doing business. We're not thinking of knowledge aware as a separate entity or as a different type of process. It's actually in everything we do. And at the extended level, the benefits of this are that it's being shared with the supply base. You're impacting the supply base's ability to improve. And as a result, the overall organization is becoming a learning organization. So hopefully that sheds some light on what we think in terms of knowledge aware. And I think at this point we ask the polling question, which would be based on this assessment. Oh, before I go into that, there's a couple things I did want to mention. First of all, as you go through this, it's obvious that there's no particular clean, precise way to define. An organization is probably at different levels at the various different elements. But there's a general sense that you can think in terms of the level you're at. The other one is that obviously it's not precise. It's very subjective, but it gives you an ability to look at where you're headed and how to improve your processes. That's pretty much where I would expect it to be. Are there any questions? Yes?
So when you're looking at implementing a knowledge-aware maturity model, what's the progression of time? How long do you think it takes an organization to move from, we're all at saying, or 50% of us saying it at a level 1. If we're looking at it, how long does it take before we could be at a level 2?
A lot of it depends on the organization itself and how prepared it is, right? My personal opinion is I don't think you ever achieve that. I think it's a vision that you continue to drive for. I think you can get critical mass again, depending on the size of the organization, you can get at a critical mass in, I would say, 4, 5 to 7 years. But it takes commitment, and it takes people to recognize the benefits of what's happening. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. I have 55 seconds left. I can juggle.
Okay, thank you, Greg. We'll have a copy of the maturity model posted up on the website after the conference so that anybody who's interested to download it can access it.